Welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys here with Tunde Ogunlana. And right now we react to a recent article that argues that a rise in self-imposed perfectionism that may be tied to societal trends is actually what's making kids more anxious, as opposed to what many believe, which is screens and social media and so forth. All right, coming back with the boss man Tunde. Now, Tunde, looking at this piece from Fast Company about why kids may be more anxious than these days than in the past. And you and I have had a lot of conversations that touched on how social media and spending a lot of time in front of screens, less time with people, all that kind of stuff plays a role. What did you think of this idea that perfectionism may be a response to, or excuse me, that the anxiousness may be a response to perfectionism, and how that may be tied into societal stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting concept, man. I think and I think you're right. Like, I think a lot of times we tend to focus on certain things, and then that becomes the kind of the biggest thing we look at, and we kind of don't look at other things. And I think your idea of the screens being the culprit for every ill with youth in the last generation, let's call it the last 20 years. I think there's a lot of truth that screens have caused a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression and a lot of kind of negative outcomes for young people.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's the only thing. So I do appreciate the spirit to try and find kind of those of us who are older than young people, say older than kids, that we feel that there's something going on with the youth, and to try and find something greater than just one excuse is important. Now, I don't know how we quantify all these other societal things, so I know the article gets into that a bit, but I do agree with the idea that we should be more open-minded than to just blame technology.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially because the screen thing, it doesn't seem like the screens are going to be going anywhere. So this is something that may be a little more constructive in terms of things that we may be able to impact change a little bit better, either on a personal and family level, or even on a societal level. Like there may be things that can be done because, the screen thing, like, I don't know that by and large that's going to be going away. Like that's a societal trend that affects a lot of different things. So to me, I agree with you actually. And I think that a lot of times, and again, a lot of times when you see stuff like this, the impulse someone may have is to say, "Oh, well, no, that's ridiculous. It can't be that." It's like an either or mentality. Like it's either one thing or something else. But most things in life aren't like that. Most things in life do have multiple things that are going on. And if you can understand kind of the different ways things are going on, then maybe you can, again, find ways that you can impact the kind of change that you want, as opposed to, if you're only looking at Everest and it's like, all right, well, I'm trying to go from point A to point B and Everest is in between, and you can't take your eyes off of Everest, then the only way you can go is right over the top. Whereas you might have just been able to go around. If you look around and see, get the lay of the land a little bit better. So one of the things that they talked about in here was he actually drilled down further, and this is from Fast Company, like I mentioned, and we'll have this in the show notes. He drilled down further in the concept of perfectionism, and there were three pieces of it that he touched on. One being the high standards, someone who has high standards for themselves. Another being someone who has high standards for those immediately around them, and then the third one being people who feel as if the standard is perfection from them that's being imposed from other people, whether that's actually the case or not, but that's what they feel. And what they found is that, and this dates to before screens becoming ubiquitous in our society, is that there's been a rise. All three forms of perfectionism have been on the rise and measured in these surveys and so forth. But the third one is the one that's jumping the most. People are putting a lot of pressure on themselves and expecting high marks from themselves. People are doing that to their family, immediately around them. But what's really jumped is that people have been young people have been more and more seeing society as demanding perfection from them. And then he hit me for a loop, and in a way that it was preaching to the choir when it comes to me. He was like, that income inequality and the inequality that we see in society may be a driver of this, and that kids are rationally seeing that, oh, okay, yeah, you got to be, in order to make it ahead, you can't just be an average dude and be able to buy a house when you come out of college and get a job, buy a house, all these things. You got to be perfect. He's called, the quote from the article that stood out to me is, "This is a reasonable response to an unreasonable world. Everything is getting 10 times harder for regular people. Then, of course, they may start feeling like, oh man, I got to be perfect in everything just to live an average life.
Yeah, it's interesting because I saw that too in the article. I can appreciate it, and I'm not going to discount it as a potential factor. I just don't think, because the one thing I was thinking, which is not part of the article, I was thinking, all right, well, how about the other times we've had big economic imbalances like the 1930s and Great Depression? Can we go back and see, was perfectionism an issue with young people? I don't know. So I think it deserves a little bit more.
That's a great point. Let me throw something back at you in light of that, though. What we're coming like, and this is why, for example, you and I can't relate to this as much, because buying a home when we're in our teens and 20s does not seem insurmountable. So most things in life are a matter of perspective. The perspective here that's very particular is that everyone else that you see who's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ahead of you weren't subjected to these same pressures. This is all stuff that's hitting your generation or your group of people. And if you go back a few, 20 years, it wasn't a entry level or, buying your first house wasn't something that you had to hit every single mark 100% in order to do. You could kind of work your way through and do that. But property values now and the job market now, doesn't allow for that, or even getting a job after graduation. That wasn't something that people worried about, in the 90s. Well, like, am I going to be able to get a job after I graduate from college? It's like, nah, like that said all the stats.
That's where
go ahead. Yeah, I just want to set that back to you.
And that's where I'll focus my attention back on the screens. Because in order for young people to have this level of anxiety, more so than in other times in history when you had these imbalances, because me, I'm not going to deny that the imbalance is out of whack for me personally now between the haves and haves not in terms of my opinion of what's healthy for society. And we can also acknowledge this isn't the first time in history we've had this kind of imbalances. So that's all I'm saying is that I think the difference now is that young people have a lot of screens and they have phones and social media, and they're also seeing everyone else, right? Because before, when we were young, we only kind of knew of our family, the older people in our family, and maybe just the people at, the professors at our university, or the people that when we got into entry level positions, you as a lawyer, me as a financial guy, maybe the older people in the office. But we weren't looking at constantly social media, like everywhere, YouTube, everywhere where everyone else is doing great. And we feel like we're not, like you're saying, this relativity to other people is now magnified so much. And I think that does create these other feelings in people that are consuming this information. And
it's an interesting mashup that you're giving there, in that you're saying that people are more aware of them, so to speak, falling behind, or the feeling like they're falling behind. They're more aware of it, whereas they are actually, relative to previous generations, falling behind, but they're hyper aware of it because it's in their face all the time. That, and then even in the people that are quote unquote winning in their generation, that's in their face all the time. Whereas, whether society at large was on the rise or on the fall, if you weren't hyper aware of it, you kind of just go about your day without worrying about all this big picture stuff.
Well, here's another example maybe for the audience to appreciate. We as Americans have been indoctrinated for a very long time that we're the greatest, right? But think about it. In the last 5-6 years, we've been looking on the internet and we've been seeing what's going on around the world. I mean, I've been seeing these videos of what's going on in China. Like, it looks pretty advanced over there. Japan looks pretty good. I've seen, just saw an aerial view of cities in Africa, and it's like, wow, we still act like Africans live in huts and are chasing friggin' lions all day. And these are big advanced societies what I'm looking at. So I think it's like anything else. Once you have exposure, your brain sees something different, it's going to manifest different in your head. And I think it's the same thing with younger people who are now seeing how everyone else is living. And let me add to this. It's a lot of times fake, right? What do people show on social media and the internet? Usually the best sides of what they got going on. So they're going to show a nice car in a driveway for a 35-year-old or 40-year-old that's going to make other people who are 32 or 28 feel envious or feel like they're not good enough. But what that person's not going to show you that they might be up to here in debt, right? Like, so we don't know
or
in
just
our society what's
bias,
going
the
on.
The person who doesn't have the nice car just isn't going to post. So you're only the people that are going to post are the ones that feel like they have something to show off.
Yeah. And so I think, and that's where I kind of I put a joke here in my notes. I put Madison Avenue plus internet equals misery. And the joke was for the consumerism. Like, this is also a reflection of our consumerism culture and this constant marketing and this constant everything's got to be new.
Well, but I don't know if you can tie that unhappy and anxiety together, like automatically at least. Now, I take it from what you're saying that you're very skeptical of what the arguments that are made in this piece. Am I correct in that?
Well, I would say this. It's skeptical in the sense of not skeptical that I don't want to believe them. What I'm once I think about it, I'm skeptical in the fact that we, like I said at the beginning, we can't blame screens for everything. But I think as I think about it deeper, it brings the screen back into play.
Well, no, so yes, you're saying that the case that they made, you don't think that amounts to something that you would say is more impactful than what you already think about the screen.
Yeah, because I would say this, James, like I feel like the change from what we understand between the roaring 20s and the Great Depression of the 1930s was stark. Like that was serious. And a lot of people were hurting in the 30s that weren't hurting in the 20s. And I just feel like, so if we were 18-year-old guys in 1932 or 33, we would have known that we were poor. Like, you know how you hear older people talk about that? Like, yeah, we grew up poor, but we didn't know it. You know what I mean? And I think there was some truth to that. Like if everyone around you in a certain condition, you're going to be less thinking about, oh, well, I got it so much worse than everyone else versus, yeah, maybe when Ebenezer Scrooge or someone like that, or the guy with the Monopoly, with the monocle comes through town on his Rolls Royce, you understand that you don't have as much as him. But generally, you had as much as most people that you were around. We're here.
So the exposure. So I mean, that's what I'm saying. So you're basically skeptical of this being a big impact. Now, I think part of that though is that you're reframing this because the two pieces that really stand out to me is the idea of perfectionism, not depression, and things like that. Like you're like, oh yeah, people will be sad, people will feel like they're falling behind. But I'm talking about the anxiety, the feel like you need to be perfect in order to swim in this world, and that feeling. I don't think you can compare it to the 1930s because we don't have comparable studies here on how people were feeling at that time. For all we know, they could have been feeling like, the harder I swim, the further I fall behind. That's making me feel like I got to be perfect all the time. That's driving my anxiety. There's something very specific that's being talked about here, and that's the anxiety piece. Why are young people who oftentimes we look at as young people feeling like they're invincible, so to speak, like they can do whatever. Like why do we have all these anxious young people as opposed to young people that are, drinking all night and feeling like nothing can stop them, so to speak. And so I think that there is something to this, the idea that if in society, if I go to school, one of the examples for it was given, one of the people talked about a guy who has a doctorate who in school was getting D's, he had, I think 3 D's in school. And it's like, well, now there is no room for error in that. If you want to get a doctorate, if you want to move up in school, things like that, how competitive it is to get into schools, that's something that is not something that we can relate to. And that's not how competitive it is to get into a school, which is the kind of thing that would make somebody anxious about every single test they take. That's not something that's driven by social media and saying, oh, well, like I'm not on screens feeling like I got to get an A on everything so I can get into whatever school it is, and so forth. So I think that there is something going on. And if you look at where screens are more impactful, then you can say, oh, well, I don't see this here. But it's like, well, but you're looking away from what particularly that we're talking about here in terms of the anxiousness, the feeling that you have to be perfect on everything. And again, the college entrance is a good example of this. I got to do all that. I'm looking at my daughter's going into high school now, and we're looking at all these things that we have to do just to graduate. And it's way more going. I went to a really good high school, and it's like, this is way more involved in terms of, the colleges are looking at this, the colleges are looking at that. I'm like, just go and get good grades and then, do good on the tests. And the world will lay down at your feet. And it's like, well, nah, that's not really the case right now. So, I mean,
well, I want to say though, that to me is why it's deeper than just this income inequality, because I'm thinking, as you're talking, I'm thinking, Ivy League's been competitive for a long time, for over 100 years. So in the 1920s, 19-teens,
but
kids were competing to get into Harvard and Yale.
That, though? But the scale, like
but that's my point. Is that
what if it's harder now?
But what I'm saying is your experience with your daughter is a good example. You were in high school 30, 35 years ago, but you're saying, as you see, it's a huge change into the type of pressure we put on young people now. And all I'm saying is, that's not necessarily a function of just the screens. It's not just a function of the income inequality. I think there's something else going on in our culture, which is probably maybe got touching on both of those and maybe some other things, but for some reason we become hyper competitive. And I think part of it is consumerism. I think it's the way that the schools sell themselves. I think we've been indoctrinated into thinking our kids got to go into all these schools and all that. Like, remember that story from a few years ago where the parents were paying? I remember one parent paid up to $1.2 million on that SAT scam to get their kids into Ivy League school, and it was like, well, the school only costs $40,000 a year, but you're spending $1 million. And that was more about the parents. I'm not blaming the kids on that one. That was the parents probably want to keep up with the Joneses at the dinner party at the elite country club. Like, oh yeah, my kid goes to Yale. Oh, my kid goes to Stanford. And then the kid not being pushed to actually study, right? The kid just being taught, hey, nepotism, we got the money, so we'll figure out how you get into school. Don't worry about it.
But to your point before, nepotism isn't new. That's been there all along.
But one of the things that the author pointed out is that, and that's what I wanted to get to too, is that perfectionism, they said it leads to the feelings of anxiety and depression over time. Like that ends up being the result because you can never actually achieve perfection.
You can never be
So to me, they all kind of swim together. Someone who is a perfectionist in an extreme way is going to end up having more anxiety and more risk of depression than other people.
Correct.
Because at some point, they're going to fail.
What's happening now is, the question is that in these certain settings, what's this? Why is the drive for perfectionism, especially where you expect other people to expect perfection of you? I mean, you said something just there that may be a part of this as well, and that's parental pressure. Like maybe the expectation in the household is one that, you got to be, you got to go to this school or you got to do this and that, and it's not about, work hard. And because I'll say for me personally, one of the things that when I'm with, as far as how I try to raise my kids, like I'm very much not results focused. I'm very much results I'm very much focused on effort and on their, are we showing up and are we putting in work? And that's with academics, that's with sports, that's with everything. I want them to get used to showing up and putting in work, and then the results not being where you get your validation from or anything like that. But if results are where you're getting validation from, this is another piece of that psychology that's the one there, then perfectionism is kind of a natural response for that. So there are ways that from the household, this can be driven as well. And whether that's to say, again, I really am careful with this because the idea that, hey, I'll go to a good college, I'll get good grades, and then I'll come out and I'll work at a place that I could have worked out without going to college. That's a world I'm not. And that's where just to be clear, that's where the idea of wealth disparity comes in. It's like the opportunities for people who are of reasonable success seem to not be there anymore. And so that's the question of, is that being driven? That could be the parents saying, hey, you got to get all A's, you got to go to the best school because that's the only way you'll get a job. And that could be driving it, or the kids could just see that stuff. So I feel like there's stuff going on here that maybe instead of just throwing the screen stone, maybe we can see that the world that the way they're perceiving the world may be playing a big role in driving this kind of idea of perfectionism. There may be more and that's why I'm glad to see something like this, is just trying to take a more holistic look and saying, are there other things going on? Yes, the screens, we know they have the screens and the social media and the algorithms and all that. We know that's doing a number on people's psyche, but it's very convenient for us a lot of times to just say that's all it is and just kick our feet up and say, hey, so just get off the screen and then your life will be okay. And it's like, well, maybe there's more stuff going on. I do want to wrap us up. Any last thoughts before we close it up, man?
Nah, we're good. That's why we'll keep observing the world here and reporting back to you guys.
Yep, yeah, we'll be exactly.
Keep liking us. If you're still with us, thank you first of all, and then give us a like and subscribe, please. That's all.
There you go. Hey man, if Tunde, that's the boss man, Tunde. If Tunde says, you gotta give it to us. So
I'm asking, come on.
But we appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Till next time, I'm James Keys.
Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk soon.